Welcome to Security Insights, the podcast. My name is Michael Gips. I've been in the security profession for 30 years, but I also have a background in law, journalism, content strategy and creation, business, marketing, association management, and other disciplines. This podcast is going to take on important security issues of the day through all of those lenses and others: law, business, technology, education, associations, media, data, human behavior, and even sports, humor, and more. At the end of this podcast, I'll be previewing future episodes. But let's go to today's guest first. I'm honored and privileged to welcome Jeff Snyder to the show. He's a Colorado based executive coach and security recruiter. He has helped countless security professionals excel in their jobs, and he has some advice that can help you thrive. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
Okay, Jeff, let's dive right in. So many security executives strive to get their voices heard at the highest levels of their organizations, yet they can't break through. They're seen as a cost center or they're too low down in the hierarchy. What's holding them back?
Wow, that's a loaded question to get this conversation started. I guess I'll call it like it is. I have
Please.
not only recruited, but I regularly study job descriptions. I pick them apart. I pick them apart, dissect them, study them, and I see things that sometimes other people don't necessarily notice. And one of the things I notice, and I created a word cloud around this. I think, do you remember when I sent that to you?
Yes.
Well, right in the center of that word cloud is effective communication. So if you want to know one of the reasons, and there are probably many different reasons, but one of the reasons that security professionals can't seem to get a legitimate seat at the table, or whatever you'd like to call it, is in many cases they lack effective communication skills.
Now, communication skills, that's a soft skill that's technically thought of, as a component of emotional intelligence. So talking more generally about soft skills or the elements of emotional intelligence, are people born with them or can they be learned? Let's take the example of a former drill sergeant in the military who now runs security for a Fortune 100 company. Is that person consigned to the fate of always being a martinet, or can they learn emotional intelligence, communicate, be a team player, that sort of thing?
People can learn how to communicate more effectively. And well, I do coach emotional intelligence, and I can tell you that this morning I was on a call with a client who just saw his emotional intelligence scores for the first time. And I think I told him 10 times because I want to make sure it really sinks in. Uh, Here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is you have some emotional intelligence. The bad news is in a couple of areas you don't have a whole lot of it. The good news, because I like to land on good news, the good news is we can work on those areas that are weaker and we can make those stronger skills.
Now, how do you do that? Because we all know we can work on, we can work on reading skills, we work on math. Doing the soft skills seems like something more difficult that we're not as comfortable with. Are there exercises? Is there a program? How do you go about teaching someone that?
Well, there's no doubt that there are difficult skills. because at the core of what you're talking about changing someone's human behavior. One of my mentors is Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, thought of in many circles as the world's number one executive coach. He coaches CEOs and other senior executives. And I'm going to simplify something that's very complex. Marshall, for the most part, coaches one skill for 18 months. Why? Because it's that difficult to change one aspect of human behavior. So, for example, if an executive has an issue with being impulsive and they're lacking impulse control, well, let's assume that that executive is probably 40 plus years old. That means they've had 40 plus years of life to develop the bad habits that lead to a lack of impulse control. You're not going to read a book, fill out a worksheet, have one coaching call, for example, and come up with the solution for that person's lack of impulse control. It's going to take a lot of time. You have to identify what the bad behavior is. That person has to get honest with themselves and accept that behavior. Then, if they're working with a coach, the coach can start to help them building better behavior. That takes time.
So let's use your example of impulse control. That's something that a coach might work with someone for a matter of weeks or months or however many
Right.
sessions. But surely impulse control is tied to many other attributes or traits. So how can that be isolated? Or you don't need to isolate it. You just have to work with the other traits and know what it it touches upon.
Well, are you asking me if I have a tool that isolates?
Well, not necessarily a tool, but this is more of a holistic look, or are you breaking down the traits and saying, okay, this week we're doing impulse control, next week we're doing self-esteem or self-regard or whatever? I mean, these things all tie into each other, so I'm just wondering
Yeah,
how you
okay.
tease one out.
Great question. I'll use the example of the person I talked to earlier today. Um, his lowest score out of 15 different emotional intelligence skills was impulse control. So we talked about the other 14 for 30 minutes. We talked about impulse control for 30 minutes. Just an introductory discussion around what impulse control is and how a lack of it can destroy all 14 other emotional intelligence skills. So that particular skill, and the reason I brought it up, is that a lot of the senior executives that I work with, they take my EQ assessment and they discover that impulse control is not one of their current gifts. It's something that they need to work on, and they usually don't know how.
You mentioned your EQ assessment. There are all sorts of tools and assessments out there. There's the Myers-Briggs type indicator. There is the Gallup um, um, skills assessment, um, the Clifton Strengths assessment, quite a few others. How do you decide which diagnostic tool to use with the multiplicity of them out there? And what do you use? And you've been doing this for quite a while. And how did you get to where you are now?
You're really good at asking these questions. um, yes, about 10 years ago, I took a Clifton Strengths assessment. At the time, it was called the Strengths Finder. If you want to be cool, you have to know that it's now called the Clifton Strengths assessment, named after the late Dr. Don Clifton. It was essentially his life's work. I've taken many assessments. I find them all to be fascinating, and they all have value. But as I took different assessments and I was evaluating them at the time, I got tired of being put into a box. So I'm not going to name any particular one. You already did. But at the end of taking the assessment tells you what box you fit into. Oh, you're one of those, or you're one of these. Here's how these people operate. Here's how those people think. Well, I looked at that and I thought, you're not going to put me in a box. I'm not a box person.
And there are only 16 boxes or whatever,
Yeah,
right? I
so
mean, yeah.
you're one. You fit into one of these four quadrants, and that's what you are. No, that's not what I am. Um, what I love about the Clifton Strengths assessment is it has 34 traits that everybody possesses. I don't have a different group than you have, but we do have those traits show up in a different order. So I am not a probability and statistics guy. I had the class, I passed it. I'm not sure how I passed it, but I did, I promise. And I know enough to know that when you have 34 possibilities, and we're going to focus on 5 or 10 of them, there are many, many, many different ways that those 5 or 10 can come together and show up. You're starting with 34 choices. So the power of this tool is that in order to find another human being on this planet whose top 5 traits, that's all, matches up to yours or mine or someone else's, it takes 33 million more assessments. In fact, just over 23 million assessments, Clifton Strengths, have been taken at this point around the world. I don't believe the match has been found yet.
Wow. Well, let's use me as an example. You're familiar with my Clifton Strengths, with the order of my
Yes.
attributes, and you know that analytical skills are high for me. Several of my top 5 or top 10 are analytical skills. Communication and emotional intelligence skills, not as much. What can I do about that? How do you take what I have and, you know, make me succeed in all key areas? Maybe you should describe a little bit about the Clifton Strengths Assessment, how they break it into the different
Okay.
categories. But use me as an example, please.
Sure. So Clifton Strengths are broken down into 4 different categories of leadership. There are strategic thinking themes. Those themes are all living and operating in our heads. Nobody else can touch it, feel it, smell it. But when we decide to open our mouth and we let our thoughts and ideas come out, that's how somebody else experiences it. That can either be an uplifting, positive experience, or it could be quite a negative experience. It depends on how long you've been brewing those thoughts in your head and what your motive and intention is. So, strategic thinking is one category of leadership traits. We all have these. Another would be executing. It's flat out how you get things done. Some people have more than other people. Another category is influencing traits. Most of these traits are quite rare. So most people don't have a tremendous number of influencing traits, and some of those people end up in leadership positions. So on the opposite end of the spectrum, your example of a drill sergeant, well, this person may be the kindest, most gentle, harmonious person in the room, and they get promoted. Well, now they run up against a drill sergeant. What are they going to do? They usually get run over like a bulldozer. The last category, in no certain order, are relationship building traits. Some people are gifted with many of them. Some people are not gifted with really much at all. So the act, I was about to say simple act, there's nothing simple about it. The act of building relationships with other human beings of emotion, who happen to have logical skills in that order, um, that is a very, very difficult task for some people. And it's really a whole lot easier for others. We're all wired differently.
Now I happen to have the results pinned to my bulletin board here, and you're very familiar with them, so this shouldn't be a surprise to you. But I have my top 10 are input. I like to bring in as much as information as I can. Ideation. I come up with a lot of ideas. Achiever, learner, intellection. I like to think through things. Competition, positivity, responsibility, maximizer. I like to maximize everything I'm doing, and self assurance. So tell me, how does that compare to security executives as a whole? And when you know, and since you know me pretty well and know my characteristics, where do I need to put my attention to succeed as a leader?
Great question. Um, if you're going to lead other people, if you're asking me what I think, is that what you're asking? I
Absolutely.
think those influencing traits need to become inspirational traits. Influencing is sort of entry level. In other words, if you take that assessment and you come up with several influencing traits near the top of your assessment, um, by default, you have influencing traits. The influencing that you're sitting on, it's entry level. You haven't done anything to make those traits get better or to make them great. The coaching process is a process to design or to identify what traits you're sitting on. In your case, you're sitting on several influencing traits that from day one, I believe I've encouraged you, tell me if I'm wrong, to turn those into inspirational traits. Those traits have the ability to get other people inspired when they're functioning at full force. Now, the other thing that you have that we've decided to not necessarily pull to the top, but we've decided to lead with is your positivity. Positivity is a relationship building trait. If you build relationships before you start to influence and inspire other people, you will get much, much better results than if you go in like the drill sergeant and command everybody and tell them what to do because you have more stars or stripes than they do and they have to listen. In the corporate world, people don't have to listen. In fact, they don't even have to stay employed with you. They can quit. Some do.
So should I peg my, I have, as I mentioned, my communication skills aren't as high as some of those others. Should I peg that to my positivity? Should I sort of harness or latch or yoke everything to my positivity, things that I'm not quite as proficient at or natural with?
Well, I know you're asking a question. I'm going to throw this one back to you. All right.
Okay,
We've been working on this for a while, and
we
that is
have.
the strategy we chose, was it not?
It was.
Are you doing that? Are you leading with your positivity before you pull
Absolutely.
everything else out of your tool belt?
Absolutely. Because I realized to get people's attention, to get them to listen to me, it's easy to use my, I'm generally optimistic and positive. If, if I weren't, and if I were just feeding people a line, I wouldn't feel comfortable about doing it. But in most situations, I'm positive and optimistic, and I lead with that, and it gets people to listen to me and feel better. And I'm able to communicate more forcefully and influence other people that way. And then you sort of get to my core skills, which are more strategic and analytical. So yes, that you definitely have helped me there. I wanted to give the audience an example of how they can take what might seem like a thin reed to balance a lot of things on. Um, and as long as they have one or two somewhere that is in their is a high attribute or in their very comfortable zone, that they can use that to enhance or pull up out of the basement some of the other attributes that don't score so high.
Sure. Well, back to the way this assessment's been described, there are 34 traits. Your relationship building trait near the top is positivity. Mine is called relator. So mine is all about building deep, meaningful, authentic relationships. And I believe that leadership in the 21st century, it has to start with authenticity. So my relator, by definition and by nature of what it is, it creates authentic relationships. Why would I not want to start with that?
You've heard the expression, the most important thing in a relationship is authenticity. And if you can fake that, you've got it made.
I'm not sure if I've heard that. I
I
don't.
think it was said about Hollywood.
Yeah.
I think it was said about Hollywood.
Well, I don't
Uh,
really like it, but
nor should you. It's supposed to be a
yeah.
joke.
Okay. So authenticity. I don't care what your traits are. Some, again, lean more easily towards building relationships than others. If you're leading other people, you must learn to lead with authenticity, with vulnerability, with humility, all those things that expose who you really are. And quite frankly, turn you inside out so other people can evaluate. That's what people are looking for in leadership today.
So obviously, security executives aren't a monolithic group. But in your experience, what do you see most in your security clients? What's their attribute profile? Where do they shine and where do they need work? And how can you best help them? Generally, I know everybody
Yeah,
varies.
everybody does. When somebody comes along and they have two or three relationship building traits really high, the strategy I'm going to share with that person always is to learn how to harness and lead with those relationship building traits. If they happen to have relator as a trait, well, we're going straight to authenticity. Authenticity is the foundation for building trust. So the answer is start with relationship building traits. Some people don't have those traits high, they have something else. So the authenticity for that person is a little different. It's to know exactly who that person is, to know precisely who that person is not, and to wrap their strategy for getting things done and for leading and for guiding other people around what they're naturally sitting on, as opposed to something that they have to try really, really, really hard to fake. Stop it.
So, generally, what do security executives need help with?
They need help with effective communication, where we started this conversation. You can't effectively communicate if you're working from a platform where you don't first have crystal clear self-awareness. So you have to know who you are and who you're not in order to have any chance at all of effectively communicating with other people and understanding whether or not those people are accepting what you're communicating.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave off here. I'm eager to do a second episode and dig a little deeper into some of the issues you brought up. But I think for now that this is fantastic, a fantastic introduction to the issue. I want to thank you, Jeff. You've been a great guest. I would like, if you stick around, I'm going to give a little preview of some forthcoming episodes of this podcast. But thank you again. One of the episodes we have coming up on AI, we hear a lot of promises about the use of artificial intelligence in security. To be sure, there are a lot of developments, but where is the killer app? We will talk to one of the leading innovators of AI in security, Jag Zaran of Pinkerton. Another episode, Not Your Father's Security Consultancy. Typical security consultancies offer time-tested services such as security audits, risk assessments, threat assessments, executive protection, and travel risk management. Consulting firms covering different aspects of security are also popping up, covering such issues as building thought leadership, developing content and security strategy, developing your brand, brokering mergers and acquisitions, and even things like Jeff does with leadership skills. We'll visit this emerging area with future guests. CSO associations. ISMA and the CSO Center for Leadership and Development are the main players in this field, but there are others. We're going to have an honest discussion on the benefits and drawbacks of associations that serve senior security executives. Confessions of an Intelligence Operative and Data Geek. I'm going to be talking to an intelligence operative / analyst who has served in over 105 countries, some of the most dangerous places around the world, and advised hundreds of corporations, government entities. And he'll discuss how he predicts tomorrow's major security issues with the help of yesterday's data. Then another episode will be on Inside the McMillions case. We'll have a discussion with the executive producer of the Emmy-nominated McMillions, in which a CSO masterminded a scheme to control, distribute, and take a cut of the most lucrative game pieces. This will be a look inside the making of that series. Security certifications. Dozens of them exist. Which are the best ones? Which are the most rigorous? Which are most respected by employers? Which yield the highest paychecks? We'll look into that. And which are mere resume patterns. Convergence and digital transformation. How does cybersecurity and physical security really get along? Are we all one happy family, or is one predominating over the other? And in the age of COVID, where does health and safety come in? And of course, we'll look at business continuity and convergence of that as well. And finally, blockchain. Besides cryptocurrency, should you really care about blockchain? What potential does the technology have for the security industry? And what's the reality? So those are just a few of the episodes we have coming up. and I hope you join me for them as they roll out in coming weeks. Thank you again, Jeff. It's been an honor to have you as my guest today.
Well, thank you for the confidence.
My pleasure. We'll see you all next time.